Welcome to Evil Unmasked. I'm your host, Sierra Elizabeth. With a background in criminal justice and criminology, I've long been fascinated by the hidden truths behind the most unsettling cases. On this podcast, we dig into the dark corners of true crime history to uncover the real stories behind the headlines. In each episode, we dive into a new case, examining the evidence, piecing together the clues, and focusing on the victims and the quest for justice. From notorious serial killers to unresolved mysteries, I tackle cases of all kinds. If you have suggestions for future episodes, I'd love to hear them. Visit evilunmasked.com to submit your case ideas. In this episode, we'll be exploring a haunting and deeply tragic case, the murder of 15-year-old Nanine Grimes. This case, which remained unresolved for over 2 decades, is a stark reminder of both the resilience of those seeking justice and the horrors that can lurk beneath seemingly ordinary lives. Join me as we unravel the evidence, explore the chilling details, and follow the relentless pursuit of justice for Nanine's death. This is Evil Unmasked. Let's begin. Nanine Lynn Grimes was born on May 7, 1965, in Thornton, Colorado. Life took an unexpected turn when her parents divorced later on in life, leaving Nanine to navigate childhood with her sister, Deanna, and their mother, Gwen. Nanine had always dreamt of a storybook family, so the split hit her hard. She found solace in the close bond she shared with Deanna. Nanine was the kind of girl who would light up a room with her kindness, surrounded by friends who adored her. Both she and Deanna went on to attend Thornton High School, where their bond grew even stronger. In 1980, the excitement of high school had just begun for 15-year-old Nanine Grimes. On the evening of September 12th, she was home alone, music playing softly in the background as she chatted on the phone with a friend about their first big science project. Her sister was at work, and her mother was out to dinner with her boyfriend, leaving Nanine with the house to herself. Nanine heard a strange noise from the other room. Curious and slightly uneasy, Nanine told her friend that she'd call her back and hung up the phone to check it out. Tragically, that call would never be made. Deanna arrived home from her part-time job around 11:30 that night, only to be greeted by an unsettling sight. The front door was wide open, and the stereo was blasting at full volume. Irritated, she assumed Nanine had thrown a party while she was gone. The living room was a chaotic mess, and an unfamiliar, unsettling smell lingered in the air. But as Deanna made her way through the chaos, her frustration quickly gave way to dread. She felt a, quote, heaviness, a thickness, end quote, that took hold of her heart. Her worst fears were confirmed when she stepped into the hallway and was met with a horrifying scene. Blood trailed and splattered across the walls, leading her to her own bedroom. There, on the waterbed, lay a small, blood-covered body. At first, she couldn't process what she was seeing, but then she noticed the Grateful Dead shirt, Nanine's favorite. The awful truth hit her. The lifeless body before her was her baby sister. Panic and despair overwhelmed her as she let out a scream, bolting from the house and racing to her neighbor's door. Frantically knocking, she stammered, quote, "I'm not sure, but I think there's somebody dead in my room," end quote. The neighbors wasted no time, immediately calling 911. Detectives Jim Wilburn and Douglas Darr arrived at the scene and were immediately struck by the chaos in the living room. The room was in disarray, clear evidence of a violent struggle. As they moved deeper into the house, they noticed blood on the kitchen floor and smeared across the fridge, with trails leading into the hallway. It appeared Nanine was continuously stabbed as she made her way down the hallway in an attempt to escape her attacker. When they entered the bedroom, they were met with a grim discovery. Nanine's body lay submerged in 3 to 5 inches of water, the result of her waterbed being punctured during the attack. Quote, "I could see a young woman lying on a waterbed," Darr later recalled. "The bed had been punctured, and there was a lot of blood, an awful lot of blood," end quote. Nanine lay lifeless in a mixture of water and blood, her body still and cold. Her t-shirt had been cut up from top to bottom, exposing her chest, yet there were no immediate signs of sexual assault. A handkerchief had been draped over her chest, a chilling detail that suggested the crime might have been sexually motivated. It seemed the killer had attempted to cover the wounds, perhaps out of a twisted sense of guilt or remorse. Following the trail of blood, investigators were led to the bathroom, where they found a gruesome scene. Blood spattered the sink, indicating that the killer had attempted to wash off the victim's blood. A partial latent fingerprint was discovered on the hot water handle, along with blood evidence from the killer, suggesting that they had injured themselves during the attack. This detail pointed to Nanine putting up a fierce fight. Outside, blood spatter was found on a spigot, and it appeared that the hose had been turned on. The blood trail led to a 6-foot-tall fence, and beyond it, the trail went cold behind a nearby business. The freshness of the blood, coupled with its location, suggested that the killer had cut themselves, rather than it simply dripping from their clothing. When Nanine's mother, Gwen, arrived home, she was met with the unsettling glow of police lights and yellow tape stretched across her front door. Her heart sank as she spotted her daughter, Deanna, in a state of hysteria. Confused and alarmed, Gwen asked what was going on, only for Deanna to deliver the devastating news that Nene was dead. The shock rippled through the neighborhood, as no one had seen or heard anything suspicious that night. The community was left horrified and heartbroken over what had happened to sweet Nanine. During the initial examination, the medical examiner discovered a staggering 86 stab wounds on Nanine's body. The presence of defensive wounds on her hands, sides, and back confirmed that she had fought desperately for her life. The attack had started in the living room, with Nanine being chased into the hallway and finally into her sister's bedroom, where the stabbing continued with such ferocity that the waterbed was punctured, causing it to leak. Although just a few of the wounds would have been fatal, the killer showed no mercy, continuing the assault relentlessly. Despite the brutality, it was confirmed that Nanine had not been sexually assaulted. The motive didn't appear to be robbery, and the overkill suggested that this attack was personal. The severity and brutality of the crime sent shockwaves through the town. Nanine's sister, Deanna, painfully remarked, quote, "He killed her after she was already dead, over and over again," end quote. Detective Doug Darr described it as, quote, "one of the most horrendous crime scenes I'd ever seen. It's one of those things that haunts you over time," end quote. Determined to bring justice to Nanine, the police wasted no time launching an intense investigation, hoping to quickly track down the person responsible for such a horrifying act. As investigators attempted to question the family, Nanine's mother was so overwhelmed by grief that she was unable to speak. However, the first promising lead came from Nanine's sister, Deanna. When asked if she knew of anyone who might have had issues with her sister or harbored any ill will, a name immediately sprang to mind: John Hastings, also known as Jansen Halter, her mother's on-again, off-again boyfriend. John worked at a local drive-in theater and had been introduced to Gwen through a mutual friend. He was notorious for his excessive drinking and volatile temper, traits that had made him deeply unpopular with both Nanine and Deanna, who avoided him whenever possible. Nanine had even gone so far as to hide in her room whenever he was around. To make matters worse, he once gave Gwen a necklace with the word bitch on it. You know, one of those trashy gold ones that used to be trendy. With this lead in hand, officers brought him in for questioning. During questioning, he openly acknowledged that he had a tendency to drink too much and struggled with his anger issues. He also admitted that he did not get along well with Nanine and Deanna. Despite this, he maintained that he had no involvement in Nanine's death and provided a seemingly solid alibi. He claimed to have been having dinner with Gwen, Nanine's mother, at his parents' home at the time of the murder. The police verified his alibi with his parents, and he was subsequently cleared as a suspect. Later, police received a tip from a concerned neighbor. They reported that their teenage nephew, whom we'll call Levi, had shown up at their home on the night of Nanine's murder. According to them, Levi appeared disheveled, covered in what looked like blood, and had noticeable cuts on his body. His unsettling behavior raised their suspicions. Additionally, Levi had a criminal record that included offenses such as vandalism, narcotics possession, attempted robbery, and attempted hijacking. Investigators promptly visited his home, but by then, his aunt had changed her stance and began to cover for him. While speaking with his aunt inside the home, one of the officers spotted Levi hiding under a table, nearly naked. Once discovered, Levi was cooperative and allowed officers to take him into custody without resistance. At the police station, his questioning raised further suspicions when it became apparent that he had lied about basic details, such as his age and his criminal record. Levi claimed to have hitchhiked from Salt Lake City, Utah, which would have required him to travel on I-25, an interstate just 2 blocks from Nanine's home. Officers collected Levi's clothing and fingerprints for analysis, hoping for a breakthrough. However, their hopes were dashed when the fingerprints didn't match those found at the crime scene, and the blood on his clothes turned out to be nothing more than dirt and grease. With this evidence ruling him out as a suspect, Levi was released, and the investigation into Nanine Grimes' brutal attack hit a frustrating standstill. In a desperate attempt, investigators spent hours at Thornton High School searching for anyone who stood out or looked suspicious, anyone who had cuts on their hands or their arms. One student stood out to them, a linebacker who had one glove on. They pulled him aside and asked him to remove the glove. They believed he was hiding something underneath. Nervously, he took off his glove to reveal a normal, unharmed hand. They left the school with no new information. Soon after, another suspect emerged, Ryan Shutter, also known as Bane Schumann, who was a handyman hired to fix the washing machine at the Grimes' home shortly before Nanine's death. He initially seemed like a harmless, pleasant man. However, Gwen and Deanna soon grew uneasy, feeling that Shutter had spent an excessive amount of time interacting with Nanine and Deanna. His behavior became increasingly unsettling, especially when he gave Nanine $43 to buy Denver Broncos tickets, a gesture that seemed out of place. Although $43 might not seem significant today, it is roughly equivalent to $163.95 in 2024, making it a notably generous gift at the time. The situation took a troubling turn when it became apparent to everyone, including the police, that it was highly unusual for a handyman to give such a substantial amount of money to a 15-year-old girl he had just met. Deanna also remembered seeing Shutter with a large knife, which added to the growing suspicion. Acting on this lead, officers searched Shutter's truck and discovered a large hunting knife hidden under the seat. The knife was sent to the lab for analysis, and Shutter was brought in for questioning. He denied any involvement in Nanine's murder, explaining that he had forgotten about the knife and asserting that he had been at dinner with his friends on the night of the crime. With no visible injuries, his alibi confirmed, and no blood found on the knife, Shutter was cleared as a suspect. Detectives attended Nanine's funeral undercover, hoping to spot any potential suspects among the mourners. A photographer was assigned to capture the event and its attendees. A fourth suspect emerged, Dominic, a friend of Nanine's, who frequently visited her home to play guitar while she read Bible passages. He performed a song at the funeral, but the performance struck detectives as peculiar and unsettling. Later, Dominic experienced a public meltdown at the mortuary, collapsing and causing a scene that led to his removal from the premises. While Nanine's family found this behavior excessive, Dominic's demeanor during his interview a few days later seemed strangely detached from his friend's death. Police discovered that Dominic had harbored romantic feelings for Nanine, which she had rejected. Despite these revelations, investigators found no physical evidence linking him to the murder. His fingerprints did not match those from the crime scene, and he had no visible injuries. Frustrated by the lack of progress, the police shifted their focus, speculating that the killer might have targeted someone else, given the extreme violence of Nanine's murder. They recalled a similar case from 8 months earlier. 13-year-old Kathleen Boyer had been found stabbed to death in a park in a ditch in Thornton. She had been stabbed 21 times, and there were no indications of sexual assault. This case stirred considerable alarm within the community, raising fears that a predator was targeting young girls in Thornton. Despite their efforts, the police made little headway in either investigation, and months turned into years with no significant breakthroughs. In May 1988, a significant break emerged in one of the cases when Samuel Dean Salaz, a man in his mid-20s, began boasting to his acquaintances that he was responsible for Kathleen Boyer's murder. Despite this alarming confession, the police lacked sufficient evidence at the time to make an arrest. Then, in May 1990, Salaz walked into the Thornton Police Headquarters and formally confessed to the murder of Kathleen Boyer, bringing new momentum to the investigation. Samuel, who was 17 at the time of Kathleen Boyer's murder, confessed during questioning that he had killed her after she rejected his sexual advances. He claimed that the act of murder had been disturbing curiosity for him, as he had always wondered what it would be like to stab someone. Samuel stated that he chose to confess because his religious upbringing made him fear eternal damnation if he did not come clean. Despite his confession, the police did not have enough evidence to make an arrest. It wasn't until November of 1990 that Samuel was finally indicted for first-degree murder and taken into custody. 12 years after Kathleen's death, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison after accepting a plea deal. The police continued to consider Samuel Salaz a viable suspect in the Nanine Grimes case due to his connections to the victims. He had attended school with both Nanine and Deanna and lived in the same neighborhood, even taking the same bus as the girls. However, Samuel maintained his innocence regarding Nanine's murder. Ultimately, he was cleared as a suspect when his fingerprints did not match those found at the crime scene. With this lead fading, Nanine's case went cold once more. Seeking safety from the lingering threat, Deanna relocated to Arizona and changed her last name to Davis, hoping to escape the shadow of her sister's killer. 24 years later, in June 2004, Nanine Grimes' case was reopened with renewed hope. Advances in DNA profiling had revolutionized criminal investigations, offering a fresh chance to solve her murder. Investigators submitted blood samples from the original crime scene to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, or the CBI, where they were tested against the Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS. This cutting-edge technology promised the possibility of finally identifying her killer after all these years. In 2000, Troy Brownlow had been arrested for theft in Arizona and subsequently served a 4-year sentence for the felony. Released in 2004, he was required to provide his DNA for entry into the national database as part of his post-release procedures. This step would later prove crucial in linking him to a previously unsolved crime. In 2005, Detective Larry Peterson reached out to the CBI requesting a re-examination of the DNA samples from Nanine's case. The call set in motion a pivotal moment that Detective Peterson would never forget. When the results came back, investigators were astonished to find a match in the CODIS database, leading to an arrest warrant for Troy Brownlow. On April 14, 2005, detectives from Adams County Sheriff's Office traveled to Tucson, Arizona, and apprehended Brownlow, now 42, charging him with first-degree murder after deliberation. 17-year-old Troy Brownlow had attended the same school as Nanine and Deanna and lived just a few miles from their home. Known for his explosive temper, he had a tendency to erupt in anger. Despite the police monitoring students at Thornton High School, Troy remained unnoticed. He was a quiet, inconspicuous boy who blended seamlessly with his peers. His name never surfaced during the original investigation, and it wasn't until 24 years later that DNA evidence finally linked him to the crime. The police dove further into Brownlow's background and uncovered a troubling history of criminal behavior, including assault, theft, and even firing a gun at his ex-girlfriend. Disturbingly, he had been employed as a YMCA official since 1986, spending nearly 20 years working with children. It's deeply unsettling to realize that he began working with kids just 6 years after committing the murder of Nanine. Despite the mounting evidence against him, Brownlow maintained his innocence. However, while incarcerated, he confided in his cellmate, Garth, bragging about his involvement and expressing confidence that he would never be convicted. Brownlow spun a tale about a mysterious third-party intruder, claiming he had been present when someone violently attacked both him and Nanine. He said he had been wounded during the attack and had fled the scene, unable to save her. He rehearsed his story with Garth, who happened to be a jailhouse informant. The scars on Brownlow's body, deep and consistent with knife wounds, were telling. With this incriminating information, Brownlow was promptly extradited to Colorado. At 4:17 p.m. on April 7th, Deanna Davis received a call that would unravel years of anguish and uncertainty. The voice on the other end revealed that her sister's killer was someone all too familiar, Troy Brownlow, who at that time was living in Arizona, the very place that Deanna had fled to escape her sister's killer. Quote, "I had expected a monster, someone with horns. Anyone who can cut up a little girl into 86 pieces has to be a monster. I had known this boy since 3rd grade," Deanna reflected. She remembered a brief conversation with Brownlow during her 10-year high school reunion, sensing an unsettling familiarity as they spoke. "The whole time we were talking, he knew something I didn't," she remarked. The realization that the person who had taken her sister's life was someone who appeared outwardly normal sent a chilling shiver through her. It was uncovered that Troy Brownlow had harbored feelings for Deanna and had gone to the house that night with the intention of expressing them. However, Nanine answered the door and, recognizing him as a friend of her sister and a familiar face from school, invited him in. This revelation clarified the absence of forced entry at the scene. Nanine must have known her attacker. It is alleged that Brownlow made unwanted advances toward Nanine, and when she rejected him, his frustration erupted into a violent rage. In June 2006, Troy Brownlow was convicted of first-degree murder in the death of Nanine Grimes. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before delivering their guilty verdict. Brownlow was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. Quote, "It's the best day ever," declared Nanine's mother, Gwen Frick. "We finally have justice. That's all we ever wanted." Troy Brownlow is now serving his sentence at Bent County Correctional Facility in Las Animas, Colorado, where he will likely remain for the rest of his life. It's a haunting thought that Brownlow roamed free for 24 years, living a full life of experiences that Nanine was tragically denied. As we close this chapter, we are reminded of the relentless pursuit of justice and the enduring pain of those left behind. Thank you for tuning in to this chilling episode of Evil Unmasked. Today we dove into the tragic case of Nanine Grimes. If you found this episode captivating, please subscribe and leave a review to help others discover my podcast. For updates and behind-the-scenes content, follow me on Instagram at evil.unmasked or on X at evil_unmasked. If you have any case suggestions or stories you'd like to hear, visit us at evilunmasked.com. Join us next week as we unravel another gripping true crime tale. Until then, stay safe and keep questioning the world around you. This is Sierra Elizabeth, signing off.